Hi darlings, we're back for more of Pippi Longstockings. This is chapter 3. Pippi plays tag with the police. Soon everyone in that little town knew that a 9-year-old girl was living alone in Villa Coola. The grown-ups in town, both the men and the women, did not approve in the least. All children needed to have someone to scold them, and all children needed to go to school and learn the multiplication tables. That's what they thought. And that's why all the grown-ups decided that the little girl in Villa Coola should be sent to a children's home at once. One beautiful afternoon, Pippi had invited Tommy and Annika to come over for coffee and ginger snaps. She had set out the coffee tray on the porch steps. It was sunny and lovely out there, and all the flowers in Pippi's garden were so fragrant. Mr. Nilsson kept climbing around on the porch railing, and now and then the horse would stick out his nose for a ginger snap. "Oh, how glorious it is to be alive," said Pippi, stretching out her legs as far as they would go. Right at that moment, 2 policemen in full uniform came striding through the gate. "Wow," said Pippi, "this must be another lucky day for me. Policemen are the best thing I can think of, except for rhubarb pudding, of course." And she walked over to greet the policeman, her face beaming with delight. "Are you the girl who has moved into Villa Coola?" said one of the officers asked her. "Far from it," said Pippi. "I'm a tiny little woman who lives in a 3rd-floor flat at the other end of town." She just said that because she felt like teasing the policeman a little, but they didn't think it was the least bit funny. They said she shouldn't try to be smart with them, and then they told her that all the nice people in town were making arrangements so that she could have a room in a children's home. "But I already live in a children's home," said Pippi. "What's that? Has it already been arranged?" asked one of the officers. "Where is this children's home?" "Here," said Pippi proudly. "I'm a child, and this is my home, so it's a children's home. And I have room here, plenty of room." "Oh, my dear child," said the policeman with a smile, "you don't understand. You have to go to a real children's home, where somebody can look after you." "Are horses allowed in your children's home?" asked Pippi. "No, of course not," said the officer. "I was afraid of that," said Pippi, sounding gloomy. "Well, what about monkeys?" "Certainly not. I'm sure you realize that." "I see," said Pippi. "Then you're going to have to look somewhere else to find kids for your children's home. I have no intention of moving there." "But don't you realize that you have to go to school?" said the policeman. "Why do I have to go to school?" "To learn things, of course." "What sort of things?" asked Pippi. "All kinds of things," said the officer. "Lots of useful things, like multiplication tables, for instance." "I've been fine for 9 years without any plutification tables," said Pippi, "and I'm sure I can manage in the future too." "Yes, but think how sad it will be for you to be so ignorant. What about when you grow up and someone happens to ask you what the capital of Portugal is and you can't answer?" "Of course I can answer," said Pippi. "I'll just answer like this. If you're so desperately anxious to know what the capital of Portugal is, then by all means write a letter to Portugal and ask them." "Don't you think you'd feel silly that you couldn't answer the question yourself?" "That's possible. Occasionally I might lie awake at night and wonder over and over, what on earth is the capital of Portugal? But you can't expect that things will always be fun," said Pippi, as she went into a handstand and stayed there for a moment. "Besides, I've been to Lisbon with my papa," she went on as she stood upside down, because that didn't stop her from talking. And there's Pippi doing her handstand in front of the policeman. But then one of the officers said that Pippi certainly shouldn't go around thinking that she could do whatever she liked. She was going to have to come with them to the children's home right then and there. He walked towards her and grabbed her by the arm, but Pippi quickly tore herself loose, gave him a light tap, and said, "You're it!" Before he could even blink, she had leapt up onto the porch railing. With a couple of bounds, she was up on the balcony above the porch. The policeman had no desire to climb up the same way, so they dashed inside the house and up to the first floor. But by the time they came out onto the balcony, Pippi was already halfway up the roof. She climbed across the roof tiles as if she too were a monkey. In a flash, she reached the ridge and then nimbly jumped up onto the chimney. On the balcony below, the police officers were scratching their heads, and on the lawn stood Tommy and Annika, peering up at Pippi. "This is so much fun, playing tag," cried Pippi, "and it was nice of you to come to visit. This is my lucky day, I can feel it." After the policeman had pondered things for a moment, they went to get a ladder, which they propped against one end of the house. Then they climbed up, one after the other, planning to bring Pippi back down. But they looked a little scared as they climbed out onto the roof ridge and started teetering their way towards Pippi. "Don't be scared," called Pippi. "It's not dangerous, it's fun." When the policemen were within 2 paces of Pippi, she quickly hopped down from the chimney and, shrieking and laughing, she ran along the ridge to the other end of the house. A couple of meters from the house stood a tree. "Now it's time for a dive," yelled Pippi, and then she jumped straight down into the green crown of the tree. She hung onto a branch, dangled back and forth for a moment, and let herself drop to the ground. Then she darted over to the other end of the house and took away the ladder. The policemen looked a bit dismayed when Pippi jumped, but they were even more dismayed as they teetered their way back along the ridge to climb down the ladder. At first they were terribly cross. They yelled at Pippi, who was standing down, peering up at them. They told her to bring the ladder back at once or she was going to be in real trouble. "Why are you so angry?" asked Pippi reproachfully. "We're just playing a game of tag. Why not be friends?" The officers thought about this for a moment, and at least one of them said, sounding embarrassed, Listen to me. Would you be kind enough to put back the ladder so we can get down?" "Of course I will," said Pippi, and she instantly put back the ladder. "And then why don't we drink some coffee and have a nice time?" But those officers were awfully sly, because as soon as they reached the ground, they rushed at Pippi, shouting, "We're going to get you now, you horrible little beast." But then Pippi said, "No, I don't have time to play any more, but it certainly has been fun, I'll admit that." And she took a firm grip on the belts of both policemen and carried them down the garden path through the gate and out onto the street. There she set them down, and it took a long time for them to pull themselves together and get back to their feet. "Wait a minute," called Pippi, and then she ran into the kitchen. She came out with a couple of heart-shaped ginger snaps and said pleasantly, "Would you like one? You don't mind if they're a little burned, do you?" Then she went back to Tommy and Annika, who were standing there with their eyes wide, completely astonished. The policemen hurried back to town, and they told all the grown-ups, both the men and the women, that Pippi wasn't really suited to a children's home. They didn't mention that they'd been up on the roof, and the grown-ups thought it might be best to allow Pippi to continue living at Villa Villacula. If she wanted to go to school, then she could make her own arrangements. But Pippi and Tommy and Annika had a very pleasant afternoon. They went back to their coffee party, which had been interrupted. Pippi devoured 14 ginger snaps, and then she said, "Those two are not my idea of what real policemen should be like. Not at all. Far too much talk about children's homes in Lisbon and plutification tables." Afterwards, she lifted the horse down from the porch, and all 3 of them went for a ride. At first, Annika was scared and didn't want to go, But when she saw how much fun Tommy and Pippi were having, she let Pippi lift her up onto the horse's back too. And the horse trotted round and round the garden while Tommy sang, "Here come the Swedes with a clatter and a clang." After Tommy and Annika had crawled into bed that evening, Tommy said, "Annika, don't you think it's great that Pippi moved here?" "Of course I do," said Annika. "I can't even remember what games we used to play before she came here. Can you?" We played croquet and things like that," said Annika. "But I think it's much more fun with Pippi and the horse and everything else." And there's Tommy and Annika on the horse with Pippi. Chapter 4. Pippi Goes to School. Tommy and Annika went to school, of course. Every morning at 8 o'clock they would trudge off hand in hand with their school books under their arms. At that time of day, Pippi would usually be grooming her horse or getting Mr. Nilsson dressed in his little suit. Or else she would be doing her morning exercises, which involved standing up straight and then doing 43 somersaults, one after the other. Afterwards, she would sit on the kitchen table and in blissful silence drink a big cup of coffee and eat a cheese sandwich. Tommy and Annika would always cast a longing glance at Villa as they plodded off to school. They would much rather have gone over to play with Pippi. At least, if Pippi went to school too, things would have been better. "Just think how much fun we could have together when we walked home from school," said Tommy. "Yes, and on the way there too," Annika added. The more they thought about it, the sadder it seemed to them that Pippi didn't go to school. Finally, they decided to try and convince her to start. "You have no idea what a nice teacher we have," Tommy slyly told Pippi one afternoon when he and Annika went over to Villa after they finished all their homework. "If you only knew how much fun it is at school," Annika assured her. "I'd go crazy if I wasn't allowed to go." Pippi was sitting on a stool in the middle of washing her feet in a basin. She didn't say a word, just wiggled her toes for a moment so that the water splashed all around. "You don't really have to be there very long," Tommy went on. "Only till 2 o'clock. "That's right, and then you get Christmas holidays and Easter holidays and summer holidays," said Annika. Pippi bit her big toe as she gave this some thought, but she still didn't say a word. All of a sudden, she seemed to make up her mind. She poured all the water out onto the kitchen floor so that Mr. Nilsson, who was sitting nearby and playing with a mirror, got his trousers completely soaked. "It's not fair," said Pippi sternly, not paying any attention to Mr. Nilsson's complaints about his wet trousers. "It's absolutely not fair. I don't intend to put up with this." "With what?" asked Tommy. "In 4 months it'll be Christmas, and then you'll have a holiday. But what about me? What do I get?" Pippi sounded sad. "No Christmas holidays, not even a little Christmas holidays," she complained. "Something has to change. Tomorrow I'm going to start going to school." Tommy and Annika clapped their hands with glee. "Hooray! Then we'll wait for you outside our front gate at 8 o'clock. "Oh no," said Pippi, "I can't start that early. And besides, I'm probably going to ride to school." And she did. At exactly 10 o'clock the following day, she lifted her horse down from the porch. A short time later, everyone in the little town dashed to the windows to see the horse that had bolted, or rather, they thought it had bolted. But it hadn't. It was only Pippi, who was in a bit of a hurry to get to school. At full gallop, she raced into the playground, leapt off the horse before he even stopped, and tied him to a tree. Then she flung open the door to the classroom with such a bang that Tommy and Annika and all their nice classmates gave a start as they sat at their desks. And there's Pippi arriving at school and everyone being very surprised. "Hey everybody," hollered Pippi, swinging her big hat. "Am I in time for plutification?" Tommy and Annika had told their teacher that a new girl named Pippi Longstocking was going to be coming. Their teacher had also heard people in the little town talking about Pippi, and because she was a very kind and pleasant teacher, she had decided to do everything she could to make Pippi feel welcome at school. Pippi flung herself down on an empty chair before anyone even invited her to do so. But the teacher paid no attention to her brash behaviour. She merely said in a very friendly voice, "Welcome to school, Pippi dear. I hope that you'll be happy here and that you'll learn a great deal." "Yes, well, I hope that I'll get a Christmas holiday," said Pippi. "That's why I've come here. Fair's fair above all else." "First, if you wouldn't mind giving me your full name," said the teacher, "then I can register you at school." "My name is Pippilotta Comestibles Windowshade Curlymint Ephraim's daughter Longstocking, the daughter of Captain Ephraim Longstocking, formerly the terror of the high seas, now a king in the Pacific." Pippi is really just a nickname because Papa thought that Pippilotta was too long to say. "I see," said the teacher. "All right then, we'll call you Pippi too. But perhaps we could test your knowledge a bit." She went on, "You're a big girl and I'm sure you already know quite a lot. Perhaps we could start with arithmetic. Now, Pippi, tell me how much is 7 plus 5? Pippi looked at her, both surprised and annoyed. Then she said, "If you don't know the answer yourself, I have no intention of telling you." All the children stared at Pippi in horror. The teacher explained to her that she wasn't allowed to talk back to teachers that way at school, and she was supposed to address the teacher as Miss. "Please forgive me," Pippi apologised. "I didn't know that. I won't do it again." "Well, I hope not," said the teacher. "So now I'll tell you that 7 plus 5 equals 12. "You see," said Pippi, "you knew it all along. Why did you have to ask me?" "Oh, what an idiot I am. I forgot to say Miss again. Sorry," she said, and then she pinched herself hard on the ear. The teacher decided to ignore this. She went on, "All right, Pippi, how much do you think 8 plus 4 is?" "Oh, about 67 or so," Pippi guessed. "Not at all," said the teacher. 8 plus 4 equals 12. "Now wait a minute, my dear lady. That's going too far," said Pippi. "You just told me that 7 plus 5 equals 12. I should think there have to be some rules, even in a school. Besides, if you get such childish delight out of silly things like this, why don't you go and sit by yourself in the corner to do arithmetic and leave us in peace so we can play tag?" "Oh, no, now I forgot to say Miss again," she cried in horror. "Could you please forgive me just one last time? I'll try to remember a little better from now on." The teacher agreed to do this, but she didn't think it was such a good idea to try teaching Pippi any more arithmetic. Instead, she started asking the other children questions. "Tommy, can you give me the correct answer to this problem?" she said. "If Lisa has 7 apples and Axel has 9 apples, how many apples do they have altogether?" Yes, let's hear your answer, Tommy," Pippi piped in. "And at that same time, tell me this. If Lisa has a stomachache and Axel has an even worse stomachache, whose fault is it, and where did they swipe those apples from?" The teacher tried to pretend that she hadn't heard a thing, and she turned to Annika. "All right, Annika, here's a problem for you. Gustav went on a school outing with his classmates. He had 1 krona when he left and 7 ore when he came home. How much money did he spend?" That's Swedish money because this is a book set in Sweden. "Hey," said Pippi, "I also want to know. Why was he such a spendthrift? And did he buy lemonade with his money? And did he wash behind his ears properly before he left home?" The teacher decided to give up on arithmetic altogether. She thought Pippi might like learning to read instead. So she took out a sweet little picture of an iguana. In front of the iguana's nose was the letter I. "All right, Pippi, now I'm going to show you something fun," she said briskly. "Here you see an iguana, and this letter in front is an I." "Oh, no, I don't think so," said Pippi. "I think that looks like a stick with a little fly speck on top. And I'd really like to know what an iguana has to do with a fly speck." The teacher took out the next picture, which showed a snake, and she told Pippi that the letter in front was an S. "Speaking of snakes," said Pippi, "I'll never forget the time I wrestled with a giant snake in India. It was the most horrible snake you could imagine. He was 14 meters long and angry as a hornet, and every day he ate 5 grown Indians plus 2 little children for dessert. Once he wanted to have me for dessert too, and he wrapped himself around me. Crunch! But I have sailed the 7 seas after all. I told him and bonked him on the head. Bam! And then he started hissing. So I hit him again. Bam! And poof! He died. So that's the letter S. How amazing!" Pippi had to pause to catch her breath, and the teacher, who was beginning to think that Pippi was a troublesome and difficult child, suggested that the class should do some drawing instead. Surely Pippi would be able to sit quietly and draw, thought the teacher. She took out paper and pens and passed them out to the children. "You can draw whatever you like," she said, as she sat down at her desk and started correcting homework. After a while, she looked up to see how the drawing was going. Pippi, who was lying on the floor, drawing to her heart's content. "Pippi," said the teacher impatiently, "why aren't you drawing on a piece of paper?" "I filled it up long ago. I couldn't get my horse on that tiny scrap of paper," said Pippi. "Right now I'm drawing his front legs, but when I get to the tail, I'll probably have to go out into the corridor." The teacher thought hard for a moment. "Why don't we sing a little song instead?" she said. And this is Pippi drawing on the floor, drawing her horse on the floor. All the children stood up next to their desks, all except Pippi, who was still lying on the floor. "Go ahead and sing," she said. "I'll just rest for a while. All this learning can be too much, even for the strongest person." But now the teacher had lost all patience. She told the other children to go out to the playground because she wanted to have a private conversation with Pippi. When the teacher and Pippi were alone, Pippi stood up and went over to the desk. "You know what?" she said. You know what, miss? It was really fun to come here and see what all of you do, but I don't think I feel like coming to school anymore. I'll just have to make do without a Christmas holiday. There are just too many apples and iguanas and snakes and things like that. It makes my head spin. I hope you're not disappointed, miss." But the teacher said that she did feel disappointed, mainly because Pippi didn't want to try to behave properly, and because a girl who behaved the way Pippi did couldn't be allowed to come to school, no matter how much she might want to. "Have I behaved badly?" asked Pippi, very surprised. "Oh, and I didn't even know it," she said, looking woeful. Nobody could look as woeful as Pippi when she was sad. She was silent for a moment. Then she said in a quavering voice, "You have to understand, miss, that if a girl's mama is an angel and her papa is a king in the Pacific, and if she herself has spent her whole life sailing the seas, then she doesn't really know how to behave at school, among all these apples and iguanas." Then the teacher said that she understood and that she wasn't annoyed at Pippi anymore, and that perhaps Pippi could come back to school when she was a little older. And then Pippi, beaming with joy, said, "I think you're awfully nice, miss, and here's something for you." From her pocket, Pippi took out an elegant little gold watch, which she placed on the desk. The teacher said that she couldn't accept such an expensive gift. But Pippi said, "You have to, otherwise I'll come back tomorrow, and then there'll be a commotion." After that, Pippi dashed out to the playground and leapt onto her horse. All the children crowded round her to pat the horse and see her off. "Give me the schools in Argentina any time," said Pippi, sounding a bit haughty as she looked down at the children. "You should try going there. The Easter holiday starts only 3 days after the Christmas holiday ends. And when the Easter holiday is over, there are 3 days until the summer holiday starts. The summer holiday ends on the 1st of November, and then, of course, it's quite a while before Christmas holiday starts on November the 11th. But it's bearable because at least there's no homework. Strictly forbidden to do homework in Argentina. Sometimes an Argentinian boy might sneak into a cupboard and sit there and secretly do homework, and I feel sorry for him if his mother finds out. They don't have any arithmetic in the schools there. If anyone knows how much 7 plus 5 is, and if he's silly enough to mention it to the teacher, he has to stand in the corner all day long. Reading is something they do only on Fridays, and then only if they have some books to read, but they never do. Well, what do they do at school then? Asked the little girl. They eat sweets, said Pippi firmly. There's a long pipe that goes from the nearby sweet factory straight to the classroom, and sweets come gushing out all day long, so the kids can hardly keep up with the eating them. But what does the teacher do? Asked a boy. She unwraps the sweets for the children, silly, said Pippi. You don't really think they do that themselves, do you? Hardly. They don't actually go to school themselves either. They send their brothers and sisters. Pippi swung her big hat. Bye now, kids, she shouted happily. You won't be seeing me for a while, but don't ever forget how many apples Axel had, or you'll be sorry. Ha ha ha. With a resounding laugh, Pippi rode out through the gate, making the gravel fly under the horse's hooves and rattling the window panes of the school. That's the end of that chapter, and there are all the sweets that the Argentinian children have at school. That's the end of today, darling. I love you. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.